Landlords of Reddit, who was your worst tenant? I'm not a landlord, but my mother is the worst tenant you'll ever have. Moves into a house with 5 kids and just turns the place into a nightmare-filled house of horrors, a church to her hoarding addiction. No pets allowed? Okay, make room for my 117 cats. Water damage, holes in the walls, broken windows. You name it, she'll destroy it. She never paid rent on time and turned on the waterworks about being a single mom every single month. Eventually the state board of health kicks us out. She asks the landlord what to do with garbage when moving out. He says put it on the curb. She doesn't clarify that she'll be putting 500 bags of hoarded garage and dead cat carcasses on the curb. Garbage slides will kill cats, and we wouldn't find the bodies until a decade later. Giant piles of garbage bags attract possums, rats, wild animals galore, and get us on the front of the newspaper, which is sitting on my desk when I come to school on Monday. House gets condemned and knocked down. Move to the next house. Same thing, 9 years go by. Condemned and knocked down. Next house. Same thing. Condemned and knocked down. Don't let my hoarder mother move into your property. I wasn't old enough to remember this, but my dad tells me the story once in a while. We rented our second floor to this older lady who always was behind on her bills and tried every excuse in the book to postpone or not pay them. Well, one day, my dad and her got to the house at the same time, so he was able to confront her about some payments that were very late, and she was like, oh, I have the money upstairs. Just follow me. While they were heading upstairs, she dialed 911. Unbeknownst to my dad, and when they got upstairs she was stalling pretending to look for the money until a cop car came. When she heard the car, she started screaming and pushing my dad, and was yelling to the cop that my dad was trying to sexually assault her. Fortunately for us, the lady was keeping a secret room without my parents' knowledge, and she happened to be in one of the rooms and heard the whole thing. She came out of the room while the officer was starting to apprehend my dad and explained to the officer what actually happened. Son of a landlord. I was sent to clean out a garage unit for a few extra bucks, brought a guy with me because it was a lot. Turns out the lady who'd been renting the unit had been secretly living in the garage for months. We threw out used needles, family photos, one particularly odd couch that we had to break into pieces just to lift it out of there, and the pasty resistance, 4 5-gallon buckets full of human waste. We didn't know it was human waste until the last bucket was on the truck and the lid popped off and splashed a little bit. I have never smelled anything so foul. My mother owns a house on the coast she inherited from her aunt and rents it out to people now that she's moved. Makes great money considering it's a decent sized town and the house is close to the beach. She doesn't allow animals due to the old wool carpets that are not easily replaceable, but she legally cannot keep children out. I didn't see it for myself, but after several attempts to contact the tenants, she drove down there herself and let herself in. Place was fucking pigsty. Diapers, vomit, baby food everywhere, literal smeared on the wall and flung onto the ceilings. Carpets were soaked and stained with piss. Tenants were nowhere to be found. She talked to the neighbor and they'd apparently been gone for a month. Had to get the police to track them down. A family of hippies, and I mean full on, flowers in their hair, guitar playing, cumbaya singing, smelled like ass hippies. I used to manage a complex of townhouses, and they moved into one of our houses. After 4 days, they threw a huge fit about how they'd had to take their daughter to the ER due to radiation from a nearby cell tower. They told us they were moving out immediately and demanded an on-the-spot refund of their deposit. Of course, I said no and went to check the townhouse. It was completely destroyed. There were black marks and baseball-sized holes all over the walls. The carpet had been torn up, and the entire place smelled of urine and feces. We later found animal feces under the carpet. It was just absolutely disgusting. Quite frankly, I was astonished that anyone could do that much damage in just 4 days. Somehow I don't think the cell tower was what made their daughter sick, and needless to say, they didn't get their deposit back. One day a cable guy came to hook up my cable, and through conversation, learned my coworker is his landlord. He went on a rant about how much of a D my coworker is for charging him rent, when I wasn't even living there. I just had my stuff there. I feel bad for anyone who has him as a tenant. My landlord was the worst tenant. For some reason this dude keeps calling me, leaving a message while I'm at work. Oh yeah, around 1 I'm gonna walk through your apartment for XXXX reason. Until I told him he needs to notify me ahead of time. I think it's 1 to 3 days. Then the day before he started leaving messages. It's every Thursday he goes through the house for XXXX reason. Oh, need to check water pressure. Oh, need to check if molding. Oh, need to check if your goddamn bed is working. I swear every week has got to be some form of harassment. My dad rented out our old house. He thought he had a good tenant. Tenant even asked to repaint the interior if we deducted 1 month's rent. Sounded good. Then when they wanted to move out we got a look at the place. When they painted they used the cheapest paint, painted doorknobs and outlets, and left big paint strokes. Looked way worse than what it must have looked unpainted. And there were large holes torn in the carpet. And none of the toilets worked, they just ran constantly. And they must have hung wet clothes on the bathroom facets, because none of those worked, and were rusted beyond repair. My childhood home looked terrible, and we had to repair. Oh, the reason we thought he'd be a good tenant? He was an executive hire to run the local hospital. Seems him and his family must have just lived like pigs in that filth. My friend's a landlord. He once evicted tenants in January after they had failed to pay rent for several months. Even though he had tried to be patient with them. He owned several properties and didn't get over to that apartment for about a week. Turns out they had turned the heat all the way up, opened all the windows, and walked out. Cost him a fortune. He tried suing and lost. Stephen. He and his girlfriend moved in. They led us to believe he was employed full-time, and she was a student. Soon after we were dealing with him cooking, eating, using common areas at like 2 to 4 AM in the morning constantly. Strong smells of like car battery in the early AM. Probably tweaking. His attempts at cleaning consisted of trying to mop the walls/surfaces instead of wiping them down or just using the mop on the floor. Cringes. Kept a puppy in the house/room at times when he thought no one was around, which was definitely a no-no. Late with rent on his 2nd month. Became hostile with all other housemates with almost any interaction, or when asked to clean up his messes. Tried to pick fights with housemates, to bait them to hit him or overreact. Luckily we didn't. Dude was a psycho. Ended up giving him his 30 days notice before he had been here his 2nd month. All the while his poor girlfriend, who we all thought was in school, was actually pregnant with his kid, and that's why she was always home. And they had been running from/avoiding her family. She was a nice girl, but you could tell she had no control in the relationship. Apparently it also came to light that maybe their relationship started when she was like 14 to 15, and he was probably 20 at the time. Grooming her, it seemed. He threatened us with all kinds of legal action. Actually did have to get a lawyer and make sure we were in the clear. Worst 3 months with a housemate. We actually threw a party when they left. I can only imagine that poor girl's life, or the kids. Only have bad wishes for Steven, since he was such a scumbag douchecano. I have a friend who has always been a perpetual roommate, probably to hold on to more of his paycheck, living in the Bay Area. 5 houses ago he explained to me that the place he lived in was completely redone, in part because a previous tenant spread kitty litter all over the carpet in one of the rooms. She then let her 6 cats shit all over that room like a giant litter box. But I've heard that this is not as rare as it should be. Anyone else heard a story about tenants like this? One of my clients had the tenants from hell. Things were going great for a year, until they burned the house pretty severely from attempting to make hair boil. Obviously, after this happened they attempted to kick them out. They refused to leave, and even wouldn't let the contractors in to work on the property damages. Finally, months pass and they get approval to have law enforcement force them out after not paying rent. Then they could finally work on getting the house fixed up again to rent out again. Once the house was fixed up, the old tenants broke into the home in revenge, poured cement down the drains, and turned on the faucets, thus flooding the entire house. So then comes the second property damage claim on their hands. They do have new and great tenants now, and I know they have gotten the law involved at this point, but it's crazy how some people are so inconsiderate and entitled these days.